Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, leave a comment if you want to leave a comment. www.legendssuperstitionmountains.com or the About section on this very YouTube channel. You can check out all the stuff you want to know. Additionally, our good friend Jack Sanfelice has his new book out, Finding El Dorado. You can find that at the Superstition Mountain Museum or the Goldfield Museum. Also at jacksanfelice.com, where Jack would be more than happy to personally autograph that book for you. So get a hold of that, grab Jack's book, go pick up a t-shirt in our store, check out the bark notes at our website, do all that stuff, keep yourself busy and happy. All right, going into this week, one more thing. Dutch Honor Rendezvous, November 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Gates will be open Friday. We have Jack Sanfelice speaking. We have James Simpson speaking. We're adding speakers as we go week to week. There should be a full panel of 4 or 5 people speaking that afternoon, evening. We are bringing back the Chili's, so Saturday night will be a big get-together. I hope to see everybody out there. That being said and done, into this week we go. Now, one thing I find a lot, and I get a lot of questions, and a lot of people sometimes get a little kind of, I'm not going to say turned off, but they get a little, they don't quite understand, is the internet, forums, chat rooms, a lot of stuff people pick up as far as clues to the Dutchman are not necessary clues, and you have to work through with them because they're like, well, I saw that. Just because you saw it somewhere doesn't mean it's actually even relevant. And then they will ask, and they get kind of like, well, what do you mean that's not a clue? So we'll go kind of run through that again, because there are real early sources, and while they do have differences between them, they also have a lot of similarities. Now, obviously, the first source was written in the 20s and 30s. It was by Jim Bark. We could talk about that all the time, the Jim Bark notes. The Bark manuscript was someone who personally knew, spoke with Julian Reinhardt, and he spoke with him a number of times, and he took that information and put what he thought he could put publicly available in there. So it's not everything Jim Bark knew or learned about the mountains from them, and it's associated with a number of other stories in the superstitions. It's kind of like an overall look at the various legends and stories. But it's interesting because it's someone that was there before Jacob Waltz died, was there when they went on the first searches, and then was searching for the mine afterwards with information from those people. So it has to be relevant to us, probably some of the most important documented information. There are dates included in there and people's names, and you can look things up and find it relevant. But it's much more straightforward stylistically. Now, people will have the problem with, like, well, he calls Julia Helena in the thing. Well, every letter he writes to Sims Healy or Gus Barkley or Irwin, every letter I've ever seen, Jim Bark refers to her as Julia. So why that's implied, we can always guess at different reasons, but he knew her name was Julia. He knew who she was. He interviewed her multiple times, as did Sims Healy. So we have that as a great source, and we know most of that material came with their meetings with Julia initially, Jim Barks, in probably 1892, early 93. And that's when he was operating the ranch. And then he began his searches after they had curtailed their searches. A lot of people like to throw P.C. Bicknell out, who came in a year or two later and started doing the interviews. Initially, there's not a lot of people talking to Julia Thomas or involved in this. And there's a great piece of work, if you can ever find it. I don't know if the Superstition Mountain Museum still carries it, but Greg Davis, our good friend Greg Davis, did it. Early newspaper articles of Superstition Mountains and the Lost Dutchman Mine. Really good source. I wish Greg would have put the authors of each article and so forth and done a little more. Maybe that could be something corrected in future editions. But it's a really great read to show you early on what people were saying about the Lost Dutchman Mine and other people who were finding gold and things in the surrounding area, especially Goldfield. So it's a good book, well, pamphlet, whatever you want to call it. The museum used to have these. I'm sure it still does. If not, you can inquire, and they probably would start bringing that back. Now, when we're looking at it, we got Jim Bark's notes, and those newspaper articles are some of the earliest articles, because that's generally what a lot of material was when it came to the interviews and stuff. But the earliest book we have, and I don't have the copy sitting here, it's very, very hard to find. It's just kind of was put together. Was at the time it was probably a nice printing, but they're very flimsy. I don't know where my copy is. I got it put away because you could probably pay $500 to $1,000 because very limited. Was Superstition Gold. Later it becomes Ghost Gold with Orrin Arnold, and he continues to reprint it. Orrin Arnold was a Don. He was commissioned by the Dons Club of Arizona to write the book. He wrote the book with the information that was available at the time. It's kind of storytelling, but that's the first book. Well, the next book, of course, we've already talked about this, was Trail of the Dutchman by Barry Storm. Barry Storm's book, which has the introduction by the Dons of Arizona, a nice photograph of the Dons back in the day, and is a very Dons and Barry Goldwater book. Probably Barry Storm's best book, overlooked, harder to find than Thunder God's Gold, but Trail of the Dutchman, I would think, hands down, I think most everybody would say is probably the best written book. He had help writing that. Now the next book, a lot of times we say is Thunder God's Gold, but it's actually this thing. And Barney Barnard eventually owned it and all, and put it out. It has a really cool map with a lot of stuff and the information that's in it. But this book, The Superstition Mountain and its famous Lost Dutchman Mine, Barney Barnard, there must be 50, 60, 70 printings of this, and it'll come in different colors and stuff. If you get one, they're neat, and if you can find different editions, always look through them, because there were things taken out and other things added in as it went through its evolution over time. It's a cool book because it gives you kind of a good chronology of a lot of stuff and the deaths and disappearances. It's meant as a good introductory piece. And of course, the last one we know that has actual real source material to it, because I believe this book has Frank Alkire and a number of people that were around at the time. This book, and I don't have my cover on it because I put the cover away because I'm trying to save it, but it's The Lost Dutchman Mine by Sim Zealy. Jim Bark's partner, person who also used Jim Bark's manuscript for part of this and had other parts added in. While we know there was another individual that did most of the writing and corrected it, we do have the original manuscript. Everything that was in there is in here. It was just cleaned up and probably taken from here to here to make this book because it was too technical written originally. Now those books, along with Barry Storm's Thunder God's Gold, which kind of slips in between there, are very, very interesting. They give you kind of that line. That's where we get the three red hills, the house in the cave, the house in the cave kind of thing, and this and that. P.C. Bicknell's primarily the Weaver's Needle idea and the 5-mile diameter and a lot of that stuff. And that's one of the problems that happens is the newspaper writers would grab, and whatever they could grab, saying, well, P.C. Bicknell's article or this or that, it becomes part of the clues, part of the whole thing. And it's very problematic because what are you looking at? I've heard the 3 red hills, the 3 red spots, the 3 red this, the 3 red that. So what is that clue exactly? But you want to always use the source material. One of the things in the source material I wanted to talk about is in Barry Storm's Thunder God's Gold. There is a picture, and if you got a copy, you should see the picture. And it's very interesting because it has a couple X's on this little rise, and there's this prominent little butte over here, and these hills and stuff. And Randy Wright started looking at this and thinking, wow, that's pretty interesting. I wonder where that map came from. Now, this book obviously comes to us from 1945. So Randy thought, well, that was interesting, and he started going around and looking at the maps. At the time, I was a big profile map guy. One of the problems I was starting to have was Irwin Ruth wasn't sure which map was what and what his dad acquired, because his dad acquired a number of different maps, and then Irwin started getting maps sent to him from people. Is this your dad's map? Is this your dad's map? He was corresponding with Sim Zealy and Northcutt Ely later, and Jim Bark. And the problem is he had a lot of material concerning this information that came from other sources. So when he sent Glenn McGill what he thought the tracings of these maps were. Were they his dad's tracings? What were they? We even have letters from Erwin Roos saying, I couldn't tell you which map is which. I never looked at the map. I just kind of glanced at it. My dad showed me stuff. I have no idea which maps he took and if there was 2 or 3. But in the Killer Mountains, they make it very clear these were the tracings of the original maps, and Erwin was damn set sure on it, and that Adolf took the originals and all that. The map, of course, we were talking about and referencing is the profile map. What Randy Wright was able to find, this is in the Killer Mountains, is that map I showed before seemed to be in Barry Storm's book, and then he kept finding various sources of that map predating Barry Storm and after Barry Storm, and people kept adding things. And eventually, as you start seeing the additions, you see it becoming the profile map. So we have no idea if that was an original, where that map might have came of, what the source really truly was, and was the profile map just basically something people were putting together over time, and it was sent to Erwin Ruth, and did Erwin Ruth think that was the real map? Now people will, you can always carbon date stuff if you find something, if something's real, but that is always problematic, and people generally jump on it and say, well, that's what you believe. My thoughts on the profile map changed when I saw all these versions and different things. There were too many that were starting to precede the date that Adolf Ruth should have had it. They were on different skins and different parchments and all this. And at the time, Randy Wright was working on 2 maps, the rice paper map and the profile map. And the profile map he started finding was a compilation of different maps. And he kind of upset me a little because I was trying to argue the profile map, and then I just kind of suddenly realized my arguments were kind of just like going to the wind. Unfortunately, all this he presented on a forum. He did great research. He put all the material together. I've went through the archives, cannot find the original post. Randy used all these different various maps, used the material, presented it as he found it, uncovered it, and talked about it. It became extremely problematic because that forum only lasted for about 1.5 years or so, and then it just went away. We've tried using what's called the Wayback Machine to grab what material we can grab, and unfortunately none of that material is available now. I can't believe that we have both dogs sitting right in here, and they're gonna just sit here and lick and stuff. Okay, anyhow, guys, get out, get out. Come on. Get out. So we're looking at these various clues, and that's why I always say you take Jim Bark's notes and you write down what you see in there. Now, Jim Bark, obviously, the Spangler family has tons of material from Jim Bark still probably that we've never heard of, things that are absolutely correct, true in there. But the only resources we really have for Julian Reinhardt come from Jim Bark and Sims Ely. While Barry Storm did talk to Reinhardt Petrasch, it was very brief. Most of his material, it appears, came from Herman Petrasch. The same went with Ralph Papps. I was very excited when I got his manuscript from the Library of Congress, and I started looking at all this stuff that was there, and then I realized again he had met with Reinhardt Petrasch, but then he ended up talking and spending most of his time, and it was the same thing from Herman, which Herman's not a terrible source, but it's a different source. Now, in all this, you'll have the people that will come to me and say, well, what about the Holmes stuff? And my problem with the Holmes stuff is it's all through newspapers. It's all different stories. It's Dick Holmes telling different stories, Brownie Holmes telling different stories, and Ida Holmes. They couldn't even get their own stories straight with themselves. And then what became even more problematic for me was Arizona Cowboys, 1905. It's being referred to as basically a tall tale that you tell around the campfire. That's the Holmes story. What I found was, outside of some newspaper articles, the Julia Thomas Reinhardt Petrasch story, you're getting very little detail from those stories. Most of the detailed stories you were getting was the Holmes stuff that everybody was just gossiping about. Yet people didn't seem to believe it. It was kind of a scoffing thing of like, yeah, there's that Dick Holmes story. But Julia Thomas was known. She was a prominent business person in local Phoenix. Reinhardt Petrasch wasn't as well known because he left shortly after that. He didn't care about the fame, fortune, or needed to do interviews and stuff. He went off with his dad and his brother, and they continued to search for the Lost Dutchman Mine, and you could actually track him around various places they were going as they continued their search for the mine. But if you go to these original source materials and read them and start putting down and building chronologies between them, you'll find there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't jive with what you've learned or what you're told. And that's what I say is always important. Before you get on to other material that has nothing to do with source material, you should be very, very careful. Bob Garman, I'd like to know more of what he talked with Herman Petrasch about, but Garman was focused on a number of other things, and he'd gotten hooked up with Travis Tumlinson, and that kind of took his focus away from the original thing. But there are things that are very critical in there, such as his searches for Herman, because we know where he was searching and where Herman believed the mine was. It was in the Western superstitions. It's where he had Robert Garman searching at specific places. I also have been privileged to see a number of journals and diaries of Dutch hunters from the 20s and 30s, and it seemed again with Herman, his focus was in LaBarge and Needle Canyon. People talk about Peterson Mesa being named after the Petrasches. I find almost just so little information of them in that specific area. But I find them out by the LaBarge box. I find them on Bluff Springs Mountain, in Needle Canyon, in very specific places that people say, oh no, they weren't there. So using that source material is very important. And one of the reasons we put it up on the website was so people could go through Bark Notes, be able to put their little chronologies down, pick up things like Tom Collenborn's chronological newspaper book and other things they could find, and then build that true early source. And one of the reasons today I talked about those specific books is that's always good, because if you have those newspaper articles and you're looking who wrote them, and then you're looking for the relevance of things, there's a number of newspaper people that wrote articles that searched for the Lost Dutchman Mine, but they're always trying to add something different. They want a different flavor. Their story has to catch the people's imagination. Now, you will notice most of these books and most of the material all comes after Adolf Ruth went missing in the mountains. And I think part of it was the newspaper articles. I think early on, no one ever thought about writing a book about this. They were actively searching. Jim Bark and Sims Ely weren't thinking. I think once Barry Storm realized maybe there was $1 to be made, he did trail the Dutchman. But by the time it got to Thunder God's Gold, he was looking at something that was more marketable, that would grab people's attention. Thunder God's Gold is that. It's there to catch you. It's got drama. It's got more mystery to it. It's not just a book about the Lost Dutchman. It's about Storm and his trials and tribulations and dealing with the people in. So we always have to take that as well as like Killer Mountains. It's about Glenn McGill's journey into this. It has some great Waltz factual stuff. So always when you're picking up the books, and especially these modern interpretations, opinionated pieces, you have to be very, very careful, because people like to say, well, I think I've figured it out and this is what it is, and they will drive out a certain percentage of things, and then they will bring some new material reinterpretations in, and you find you're not looking at the source. The funny thing is, all the early newspaper articles state emphatically that Julia was told by Waltz that the Lost Dutchman mine, his camp, was a short distance in the mountains from the western side of the Superstitions. That's Julia. That's the reporters initially talking to her. So that's important, and we get so far away from that. You got people say, oh, it was in Wickenburg. It was at the Vulture Mine. It was up in Carefree Cave Creek. And you can see when people pick up a book, if they pick up the wrong book, they're going to go the wrong direction. So hope everybody enjoyed that for Chasing Legends. I hope everybody's able to pick up some of these books without putting down an arm and a leg. Bernard should be the easiest to find somewhere on eBay or online or at Amazon. But pick up this material, go through and do what I've always done. Chronologically look at stuff, and then do the hardest thing in the world. Find the stuff that doesn't need to be there, the stuff that you say is very unlikely, the stuff that just doesn't hold any water, and get it out of your head. Because if you don't get it out of your head, it's always going to confuse you, send you in the wrong directions, or puzzle you why it can't work. And the other, probably most important, is quit matrixing things. Quit thinking your opinion matters in the facts, because your opinion doesn't matter in the facts. The facts are what they are. So whatever's factual has to be factual. You can't change it. It is what it is. All right. So there you go. I hope everybody enjoyed it this week. I hope everybody liked me in 4K. Hope everybody has a great, wonderful week this week. So thank you again for joining us. And always remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.